USS Nevada was at the bottom of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. She was sunk. She had a hole the size of a house in her hull. Her captain was ashore, and the men trying to get her out were killed doing it. The Japanese thought they had finished her. They had not. She came back. She fought in 5 more invasions across 2 oceans. She was the first Allied ship to open fire on D-Day. She was still fighting in 1945. And then the United States Navy painted her bright orange, anchored her in a lagoon in the middle of the Pacific, and dropped an atomic bomb on her. So what do you do with a ship that will not die? The USS Nevada was laid down in November 1912 at the Fore River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts. She was launched in July 1914 when she was commissioned in March 1916. She was something new. The Navy called her a standard-type battleship, but the designers had built something more radical than that. She was the first American battleship to run entirely on oil instead of coal. She was the first to use a system called all-or-nothing armor, which meant her protection was concentrated only around the most critical parts of the ship, the magazines and the machinery, with almost nothing in between. The logic was that thin armor just slowed shells down slightly. It was better to have nothing at all in less important places, and use all that saved weight to make the vital parts nearly impenetrable. Her belt armor was 13 inches thick. Her main gun turrets were armored to 18 inches. Her 10 guns fired shells in 2 calibers, 14-inch and 5-inch. She displaced 30,500 tons in full fighting condition. She was 583 feet long. She had been designed at a time when the coal-fired battleship was still the standard. Oil fuel gave her a cleaner burn, a faster speed, and a longer range than almost anything she was likely to fight. She could make around 20 knots. Not fast by later standards, but the men who built her believed she was the future of the American fleet. They were right. Every American battleship built after Nevada used the same all-or-nothing armor principle. She was the template. Historians have called her as revolutionary in her day as the original dreadnought. On the morning of December 7, 1941, she was moored alone at the northern end of Battleship Row. Ford Island sat in the middle of Pearl Harbor, and the big ships were tied up along its southeast shore. The Arizona was ahead of her. The Oklahoma, the West Virginia, the California were strung out along the row. Most of them were moored in pairs, outboard against inboard, which meant the inner ships could not get underway even if they tried. The Nevada was alone. That detail mattered. The officer of the deck that morning was Ensign Joe Taussig. He was fresh out of the Naval Academy. It was one of his first watches as officer of the deck. His captain, Commander Francis Scanland, was ashore visiting his wife in Honolulu. It was a Sunday. The ship's band was playing morning colors at 0800. Taussig had ordered a second boiler lit earlier that morning. He had a routine reason for it. The normal practice was to run on a single boiler in port. Taussig was planning a scheduled switch between boilers and wanted the second one warm and ready. That decision, made for no dramatic reason whatsoever, was the reason the Nevada could move when everything else could not. At 0757, the first Japanese planes appeared over the harbor. The Arizona was hit almost immediately. She erupted in a fireball that could be seen from miles away, killing more than 1,000 men in seconds. Burning oil from her and from other ships began spreading across the water toward the Nevada. Taussig was hit in the leg early in the attack. His thigh bone was shattered. He refused to leave his station. He was there directing the anti-aircraft guns when the bone came through. He was eventually carried below only when he lost consciousness from blood loss. He later lost the leg entirely. He received the Navy Cross. He was back on duty 3 days after the surgery. While Taussig was at his guns, Chief Bosun Edwin Hill was making the Nevada's escape possible. Hill had been in the Navy since 1912. He had 30 years of service. In the middle of the attack, with bombs falling and aircraft strafing the harbor, Hill led his men off the ship and onto the pier to cast off the mooring lines. He freed the ship. He dove into the harbor and swam back to the Nevada as she began to move. He climbed back aboard and kept fighting. I went back and checked what Hill did next 3 times before I believed it. He ordered a group of young sailors, some of them 18 and 19 years old, to take cover behind the gun turrets because he could see they were about to be killed standing in the open. Then he went forward to the forecastle to drop the anchor as the Nevada was being brought to a stop. A bomb struck the bow. Hill was blown overboard and killed. He was 47 years old and had served the Navy for 30 years, and he was killed doing his job in the middle of a battle he had done nothing to cause. He was awarded the Medal of Honor. The Navy named a destroyer escort after him in 1943. The Nevada was underway by 0840. She was the only battleship to get underway during the entire attack. The sailors on the ships around her, the men on the burning Oklahoma and the sinking California and the dry dock where the Pennsylvania sat trapped watched her move and cheered. In the middle of the worst morning the United States Navy had ever experienced, the Nevada was moving. The Japanese saw her moving too. The dive bombers from the second wave switched targets immediately. The Japanese pilots wanted to sink her in the channel and block the harbor. They hit her with at least 5 bombs in quick succession as she steamed past 1010 dock. One bomb hit near the bow. Another hit the base of her stack. Another blew open the galley. Fires spread across the boat deck and into the superstructure. The forecastle was burning. Water was flooding through the torpedo hole in her port side and through the bomb holes in her hull. She was sinking lower with every minute. Harbor control ordered her not to attempt to exit to open sea. A moving battleship was drawing every Japanese aircraft in the harbor. The fear was she would sink in the channel and seal the harbor completely. She was ordered to beach herself. At 0908, she ran aground near Hospital Point, her bow pushing into a cane field on the shore. She settled onto the bottom, still burning. By the following morning, she had slid further off the coral ledge and sunk to the harbor floor in shallow water. 60 men were killed, 109 were wounded. The salvage crews went to work in December. They pumped her out, patched her, and on February 12, 1942, they refloated her. She was sent to Puget Sound Navy Yard on the west coast of Washington State for full repair and reconstruction. The shipyard crews rebuilt her almost from the keel up. New armor was added to her decks. Her old boilers were replaced. Her anti-aircraft guns were completely changed out. Her secondary battery was redesigned. When she emerged from the yard in October 1942, she looked almost nothing like the ship that had been sunk less than a year before. And then she went back to war. In May 1943, she provided bombardment support for the American landings at Attu and the Aleutian Islands. The Japanese occupied territory off Alaska. That was her first combat since Pearl Harbor. She then transferred to the Atlantic, running convoy escort duty against the threat of German submarine attack and surface raiders. In June 1944, she was off the coast of Normandy. She was assigned to Utah Beach, the westernmost of the 5 Allied landing zones. The assignment was immense. Nevada was responsible for suppressing 110 German gun positions spread across the inland area behind Utah Beach. 3 divisions of American troops, including the 82nd and 101st Airborne, who had dropped behind German lines in the dark, were counting on her fire to keep German artillery from tearing the landing apart. On June 6, 1944, in the early hours before dawn, the Nevada fired the first Allied shots of the D-Day landings. The largest amphibious invasion in history opened with a broadside from a ship that had been sitting on the harbor floor of Pearl Harbor 2.5 years earlier. She fired 337 rounds of 14-inch shells at Utah Beach. She fired 2,700 rounds from her 5-inch guns. Army spotters in the air directed her fire to targets 15 miles inland. Her commanders were later told her shooting was incredibly accurate. Of the 21,000 troops that landed at Utah Beach on June 6, fewer than 200 were killed. It was the least costly of all 5 landing beaches. She came back to Normandy 9 days later to bombard the German-held port of Cherbourg. This time, the German shore batteries fired back. German 11-inch guns straddled her 32 times during the battle. The battleship USS Texas took a direct hit during the same engagement. The Nevada was not hit. She fired 1,216 more main battery rounds and 3,531 5-inch rounds before withdrawing. From Normandy, she crossed the Mediterranean to southern France for Operation Dragoon in August 1944, then back across to the Pacific for the invasion of Iwo Jima in February 1945. Then Okinawa in the spring of 1945, where a Japanese kamikaze aircraft struck her and an artillery shell hit her hull. She kept fighting through both hits. She fired her guns in combat for the last time off Okinawa in June 1945. She was decommissioned in February 1946. She had been in service for 30 years. She had been sunk and rebuilt and had fought in 6 major combat operations across 3 oceans. She was the oldest American battleship still in service at the end of the war. She was the only battleship present at both Pearl Harbor and the Normandy landings. Nobody wanted to scrap her, at least not publicly. The state of Nevada followed her closely throughout the war. When she came home from Europe in 1944, the state sent her crew a chest full of 2,100 silver dollars, one for every man who had fought in the European invasions. There were calls to preserve her. The people of Nevada considered her theirs. The Navy said no. She was 32 years old and the war had ended. The new ships coming out of American yards were faster, heavier, and built for a world where aircraft carriers were the decisive weapon, not battleships. There was no operational future for the Nevada, but they did not simply send her to the breakers. In July 1946, she was assigned to be the aiming point for the world's first peacetime test of an atomic bomb at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The Navy painted her bright orange. They called her a big red lobster and the ship with scarlet fever. They trimmed her decks with white to make her stand out even more. They put a flashing strobe on her to guide the B-29 bombardier. They loaded her with scientific instruments and placed goats and pigs and rats on her decks to measure the biological effects of the blast. On July 1, 1946, the Army Air Force B-29, Dave's Dream, dropped a single 23-kiloton plutonium bomb over the target fleet. The aiming point was the Nevada. The bomb missed by 1,700 yards. It detonated over a transport ship called the Gilliam instead. The Gilliam sank within seconds. The Nevada survived the second test on July 25, was an underwater detonation. The bomb went off 90 feet beneath the surface of the lagoon. The explosion sent a column of radioactive water 500 feet into the air. The base surge rolled across the fleet in a wave of contaminated spray. The Nevada survived that too. She was damaged and extremely radioactive, but she was still floating. A Geiger counter crew that boarded her days later found a dying pig in a 40mm gun mount. Its white blood cells had been almost entirely destroyed by radiation. That was what the ship had survived. She could not be decontaminated. Nobody could figure out how to safely clean a ship that had been drenched in radioactive water. The Navy had no method and no precedent. She was too radioactive to crew, too contaminated to return to service, and too old to justify the effort of trying. She was formally decommissioned on August 29, 1946. She sat inactive for 2 more years. On July 31, 1948, the Navy towed her 65 miles southwest of Pearl Harbor and sank her. Warships, including the battleship USS Iowa, fired shells into her hull. Aircraft dropped bombs on her. A torpedo was dropped amidships. It took 4 days. She sank upside down. Her turrets fell off as she rolled and hit the seafloor separately. Her bow and stern were torn free. The hull carried the marks of every weapon that had been used to finally put her down. She lies at 15,400 feet beneath the surface. Her bell is at the USS Nevada Memorial in Pearl Harbor. Her anchor is at the Nevada State Museum in Las Vegas. One of her guns, recovered from the Arizona and later mounted on Nevada, stands today at the Arizona State Capitol alongside a gun from the Missouri, a memorial linking the first day of the war to the last. There is no memorial where she actually rests. The Pacific is wide and deep, and 65 miles from Pearl Harbor is a long way from anywhere. She went from the harbor where the war started, through 5 amphibious invasions, through 2 atomic bombs, and down into water nobody can reach. She was sunk at Pearl Harbor in 1941. She came back. They finally had to use everything they had.